Hey guys! Tonight we descend into a world of ink, whispers, and an unspoken dress code of wool robes and poor posture. You've just stepped into the heart of knowledge, an ancient library so old and dusty, even the air feels like it's been alphabetized. Shelves groan under the weight of scrolls, tomes, and 1,000 years of badly spelt names. There's no coffee machine, no Wi Fi, no comfy beanbag reading nook. Just you, a quill, and a librarian who may or may not be judging your aura. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive just past dawn, clutching a small satchel filled with dry bread and a sliver of hope. The entrance is flanked by two statues of owls, weathered, crumbling, and oddly accusatory. You duck under the arched doorway and into the gloom, greeted not by warmth or welcome, but by the faint scent of burnt wax, mildew, and unwashed scholar. It's oddly calming, like you're not supposed to be here, which means you're exactly where history begins. The walls are lined with shelves, but these aren't your IKEA standards. They're uneven planks of wood, lashed together with string and academic ambition. Some are sagging from age, others are propped up with bricks, and all of them seem seconds away from toppling into a heap of ruined scrolls and dreams. You consider offering your help. You don't. That would draw the librarian's attention, and you're not quite ready for that. Instead, you tiptoe deeper. The floor creaks underfoot, stone slabs groaning like they too regret every philosopher who ever walked on them. The lighting is a murky dance of early sunlight and guttering candles. You squint, unsure whether you're seeing ancient knowledge or just soot illusions. You pass a table. On it, a bundle of papyrus scrolls, half unrolled and curling like they're trying to escape. One is stuck together with something you hope is wax. Another is so brittle it crumbles slightly when a breeze from the open door sighs across it. And at the far end of the room, like a gargoyle made of linen and disdain, sits the assistant. She doesn't look up, just keeps writing. Dip the reed, scrape it across the parchment, frown, repeat. You think she might be a statue until she snorts softly. At your shoes, probably. Or your haircut. Or just your entire essence. You clear your throat softly. I'm here to help, you say, which is the historical equivalent of walking into NASA and offering to hold a wrench. She says nothing, points to a pile of dusty scrolls with a quill that looks like it's been chewed by a goat. You're not sure if that's your assignment or a warning. You approach the scrolls. One of them has a title that translates loosely to On the Management of Chickpeas and Other Philosophies. Another has no title, just a doodle of a fish. You pick up the fish one. The parchment crackles like firewood. Here's the thing they don't tell you about ancient libraries. They're barely libraries, more like chaotic museums of desperation. Nothing's in order. One shelf holds farming records from 500 BCE, an erotic poem about olives, and a rant from someone named Plinius about why goats are the worst livestock. There are no call numbers, just guesswork and vibes. You try to ask where the astronomy texts are. The assistant looks at you, not with you, at you, like she's deciding whether you're worth a syllable. She sighs, long, with undertones of judgment, and gestures vaguely at a cobwebbed corner labeled Stars ETC. You go there. You regret it immediately. Every scroll you pick up is labeled with faded ink and even fainter hope. Some are illegible. One appears to be written backwards. Another is written in a dialect. Historians still argue whether it's Proto Greek or the author sneezed mid sentence. You find one that might be about lunar phases or butter storage. The line between science and pantry management was very thin back then. As you sit and begin trying to transcribe, you realize the ink smells pungent. That's because it's made from soot mixed with vinegar and wine, sometimes gall nuts, sometimes just beet juice and optimism. And the quill? It's not ergonomic. It's a sharpened feather that pokes your hand every time you grip it wrong, which is always. You dip it into the inkwell, which is really just a shallow clay cup that someone's cousin shaped after a few too many figs. You try to write. Nothing comes out. You dip again. Too much. The ink splatters. A dark blob spreads across the parchment like gossip in a monastery. You panic. You blot. You smudge. Congratulations. You've now created a Rorschach test for scholars 500 years from now. They will assume it means agricultural ritual involving frogs. The assistant tuts. Once, loudly, you jump. You smile. She does not. And so begins your day as an honorary library minion, unpaid, untrained, and undeniably underdressed for the damp. As you sit there, wrestling with scrolls, squinting in candlelight, and praying the ink doesn't stain your only tunic, you start to realize something important. You're not here to read, you're here to survive. And somewhere, in the shadows, the assistant nods, probably not at you, maybe not even at all, but the parchment rustles and the knowledge sleeps on. You reach for another scroll, determined to prove yourself less useless than a moth in a windstorm. This one is labeled Treatise on Stars, but when you unroll it, it turns out to be someone's shopping list. Almonds, oil, goat cheese, a single doodle of what appears to be a man punching the moon. You roll it back up slowly and pretend that didn't just happen. Welcome to the confusing world of ancient categorization, where every scroll is shelved based on the mood of the person who last touched it. The assistant shuffles past you silently, barefoot, her robe trailing dust like a comet. She grabs a papyrus roll off the pile you were working through and places it carefully on a completely different shelf labeled Myths Probably. It has no date, no author, just a crude picture of a man wrestling an ibis. Maybe it's religious. Maybe it's autobiographical. Either way, it now lives next to something titled Weather Untrustworthy. You glance up, eyes burning from candle smoke, and try to make sense of the shelving system. There's no logic here. One stack is sorted by how red the ink is, another by whether or not the scroll includes diagrams of knees. One small crate is just labeled Things We Don't Like. The assistant notices you watching. She meets your gaze with an expression that can only be described as, "You absolute fool." Then she turns on her heel and vanishes into the darkness again, likely to file your soul under pending. You try your best to help. You make a little pile labeled Astronomy Probably, but then you second guess yourself. Is this actually astronomy? Or is this a treatise on sacred birds written in metaphor? You read a few lines aloud under your breath. And the fire-winged star passed through the oxen's gate to deliver judgment upon the fish of midnight. You blink. That could be astronomy. Or someone was extremely drunk on date wine. Or possibly both. Historians still argue whether some of these scrolls were intended as scientific documents, or simply poetic complaints about constipation disguised as celestial allegory. The line is fine and very, very blurred. You carry one scroll over to a shelf labeled celestial. There's no room. You try to gently rearrange them, but the scrolls uncoil, then spring forward like a vengeful jack in the box. One knocks over a small clay lamp. You gasp. The assistant reappears. No footsteps, just suddenly there, like she materialized from a cloud of judgment and library dust. She says nothing, just rights the lamp, picks up the scroll you dropped, looks at it, looks at you, then relabels it damaged and slides it under a table. You wonder if she means the scroll or you. Later, you attempt to help copy a short passage. The original is faded, written in what might be Aramaic or just very bad penmanship. You squint, tracing each curve with care. Your hand cramps almost immediately. You dip the quill, steady your breath, and begin. You make it 4 words before the ink splatters. You make it 7 before you smudge the line with your thumb. You make it 12 before a droplet of wax from the overhead candle lands right on the word divine, turning it into dive. The assistant glances at your work. She doesn't speak, but she does roll her eyes so hard you're concerned they might become unshelvable. Meanwhile, across the room, a low argument has started between 2 elderly scholars. One insists that the scroll he's holding is the lost second volume of Aristotle's musings on wind direction. The other claims it's just a list of soup recipes with fancy metaphors. You try to stay out of it. Last time you interfered, you were assigned 2 hours of scroll straightening duty. With your bare hands, no gloves, no reward, just the vague, gritty satisfaction of feeling slightly useful. At one point, a small child runs through the stacks. No one knows whose child this is. He screams the word fire and vanishes. No one even flinches. You think that says a lot about the state of things. You go back to your corner and find a scroll tucked halfway under your stool. It's labeled unfinished. You begin to read. It begins with, "And so the stars weep for the earth," and then it just stops. You stare at the blank remainder of the page. You wonder if that was the ending, or if the writer was called away, or turned into a pillar of salt, or more likely, got into an argument with the assistant and gave up. By now, your fingers are stained with ink. Your nails are caked with dust. You've sneezed so many times that you're half convinced the assistant is counting. A silent tally for each time you disturb the air. The inkwell is empty. You go to refill it from the jar by the scriptorium wall. It's heavy, smells like fermented berries and charcoal, and has something floating in it that looks like regret. You pour. It glugs. Slowly, like it's reconsidering the point of existing. A bit splashes on your tunic. You sigh. The assistant somewhere smiles. You don't see it, but you feel it. You return to your seat, pick up the quill, begin again. You've written the phrase Kubudrain, the stars weep for the earth 9 times now, each one with slightly more panic in the line weight. The 10th attempt is passable. You nod proudly. Then you realize the scroll was upside down the whole time. You put your head on the desk. The wood is warm from the candle beside you. It smells like scorched pine and disappointment. You close your eyes for a second. Just 1 second. The assistant taps you on the head with the blunt end of her quill. Gently. You're awake again. Welcome to the library. The hours drag like a reluctant mule with a leg cramp. You're still sitting cross-legged on a stool that feels carved from regret, hunched over a table that's seen more despair than an unfinished doctoral thesis. Your back aches, Your fingers are permanently puckered from drying ink, and there's a suspicious crunching sound in your left knee every time you shift. And then you hear it, the gentle, malicious creak of approaching sandals. The assistant is back. She places a new scroll in front of you, its edges crumbling like burnt toast. There's a small note attached, one word in Latin that, depending on interpretation, could mean translate, copy, or suffer. You blink up at her. She blinks back. It's the only exchange you've had all day that feels honest. This scroll is ancient, even by ancient standards. The parchment is stiff, the ink faded like a broken promise. You unroll it slowly, reverently, like you're diffusing a trap. Every inch reveals more of the same tight, looping script, a tangle of letters with all the charm of dental floss in a thunderstorm. The header says something about stars and fate. Typical. Everyone in the past was obsessed with stars and fate. No one just wanted to write, "Hey, we planted beans today, and it was fine." Always destiny, always portents, always someone shaking their fist at Jupiter. You begin to transcribe, letter by letter, loop by loop. Your hand moves like a snail with arthritis. You finish one line, then another. You feel a flicker of pride. You're doing it. You're participating in the preservation of human knowledge. The scroll curls violently inward like it's possessed. You panic. Try to smooth it flat. It curls again. It's alive. You press your elbow against one side, a candle holder on the other. That mostly works, until a breeze from a drafty window flips the entire thing off the desk and into your lap. The assistant sighs in the distance, a sound that could register on a seismograph. Eventually, you get it under control. You go back to writing, and just when you're finally in the groove, when your ink flow is steady, your breathing calm, and your letters almost legible, the scratching begins. It's coming from under the table. You freeze. There it is again. Skirt. Skirt. You slowly lift the hem of the dusty tablecloth and come face to face with a mouse. A small one, staring at you like you interrupted its lecture. It's holding a crumb, possibly from the almond scone someone left near the economics kind of section. You both make eye contact. An understanding is reached. You lower the cloth. Library assistants in the ancient world didn't just manage books. They managed chaos, pest control, crowd control, mood control, especially their own. And in this case, they did it all with no traps, no poison, and no mercy. You once saw the assistant slap a spider into another dimension using nothing but a scroll labeled Plato's Appendix. Still, the mice remain, as do the silverfish, the moths, and whatever that thing was that blinked at you from inside a storage jar. You focus. You finish a page. Then you reach for the next scroll, and it's wet. Not damp, wet. You sniff it. It smells like goat. The assistant walks past and, with no explanation, swaps it for a new one. You don't ask. You've learned. Instead, you look around the room, taking stock. The other scribes are in various stages of collapse. One is snoring lightly into a stack of wax tablets. Another is frantically erasing something with a chunk of pumice. The oldest one, a man with a beard like a broom dipped in ash, is still writing, slowly, reverently, in a script no one's used since Atlantis sank. You reach for your next scroll. This one is different. It's tiny, barely longer than your hand. It seems to be a personal letter. You unroll it carefully and read, "Dearest Lucilla, I have misplaced the recipe for lentil pie again. Please ask Mother if she still remembers it. If not, I fear I must invent soup." You smile. It's the first scroll all day that doesn't feel like It's judging you. You tuck it under the table for later, a secret piece of comfort. Lunch is not a thing here. There's no bell, no break, no communal soup pot with ancient croutons. Instead, you quietly chew on a crust of bread from your satchel. It's hard, like emotionally hard. You chip a molar. Probably. You don't tell anyone. You just add that to the growing list of bodily compromises you've made in service of ancient bureaucracy. And as you sit there, chewing stone bread, copying cursed scrolls, blinking through ink fumes and rodent diplomacy, you come to a very real conclusion. Nobody knows where anything is, not even the assistant. There's no index, no table of contents, no color coding or sorting by subject. There's just a vague understanding of that pile over there is mathish and don't touch the ones bound in snakeskin. Even the assistant, who seems omniscient, sometimes stands and stares at the stacks for a full minute, then shrugs and picks a scroll at random. You once caught her consulting a chart titled Books That Might Be Real, and yet, somehow, knowledge survives. These scrolls, these scratchy records, these dusty, opinionated texts, they persist, passed down, copied again and again, smudged, burned, misplaced, found, translated, retranslated, misunderstood, and still here. You realize you're not just reading history, you are history. Smudged, confused, hungry history, you sneeze. Ink flies across your parchment in a dramatic arc. The assistant looks up. You brace for her judgment, but instead, she smirks. Just slightly, then returns to her work. And that, right there, is possibly the highest compliment you'll ever get in this library. You begin to suspect the assistant doesn't sleep, or blink, or possibly breathe. She's there when you arrive, there when you try to sneak out for a stretch, and there when you attempt to decipher a scroll by candlelight with the posture of a shrimp. Always present, always silent, always somehow behind you even when she clearly walked the other way. Your goal today? Find the scroll about navigation by stars for the visiting scholar from Corinth. He smells like fish and disapproval and keeps muttering about needing it before Mercury leaves retrograde, which doesn't even mean anything yet. You nod and promise you'll try your best. You start digging through a pile that could legally be classified as a hazard. The scrolls are brittle, rolled tight with the angry memory of whoever last copied them. Some are tied with twine, some with what looks suspiciously like old hair. You try not to think about it. One is wrapped in a linen strip with a smear of something red. You really try not to think about that. You find something titled Constellations According to Croesus. It seems promising until you open it and discover it's just a list of vaguely star-shaped foods. Chickpeas, oysters, a pie shaped like Pegasus. You sigh. You roll it up again, carefully. Someone, somewhere, thought this was important. Maybe they were right. Maybe they were hungry. As you search, a large flat scroll unrolls itself at your feet. You stoop to inspect it. The top reads, Index of Indexes. Excited, you lean closer, only to discover it's entirely blank. You wonder briefly if it's a prank. The assistant walks by at that exact moment and without stopping mutters, "It's for the idea of indexes," then disappears again into the shadows, like a ghost fueled by deadlines and mild spite. Historians still argue whether library assistants were full scholars in disguise or simply overworked guardians of sanity who weaponized silence like a dagger. You're leaning toward the second theory. The library is not quiet. That's the myth. It's full of noise, tiny, unending noise. scratching of quills, coughing fits, whispered arguments about Latin conjugations, someone 3 tables over humming the same 3 notes for what might be eternity. You try to tune it out. You focus. You dig through the navigation section, which is also, confusingly, the herbal remedies section. One scroll discusses lunar patterns and fever dreams. Another promises to heal gout if you stand beneath the North Star and recite a poem to your left foot. You're not sure which half to trust, possibly neither. Eventually, you find it, the scroll. It's slim, water damaged, and smells faintly like roasted fennel. You unroll it like a relic. The ink is shaky but legible. Diagrams of constellations with charmingly inaccurate labels. One is clearly Orion, but labeled Guy with Spoon. Another just says Gertrude. You don't ask. You deliver it to the scholar. He grunts, reads 2 lines, then frowns. This isn't Ptolemy, he mutters. This is someone named Lilo? You shrug. He takes it anyway. You suspect it'll be cited in a future paper as anonymous, possibly fictional. You return to your seat. The assistant gives you a nod. You feel like you've just been knighted. As the candles burn lower, their wax pooling like forgotten thoughts, the air grows thicker. Not with smoke, but with expectation. Someone is coming. You can feel it. The assistant straightens. The scribes shift uncomfortably, and then he enters, the Grand Archivist. No one knows his name. He's older than the stairs. Wears a robe so long it probably predates the alphabet. Carries a staff made of wood from a tree extinct for centuries. His beard is braided. His sandals are made of scroll scraps. His presence silences the room. He surveys the scribes, the assistants, the air. Then, without warning, he speaks. Where is the index of lost things? No one breathes. The assistant steps forward. Her voice is dry papyrus wrapped in thunder. It was misfiled. The archivist raises one ancient eyebrow. Under what? She hesitates, then replies, Hope. You're not sure if that's poetic or terrifying. Possibly both. He nods, turns, walks away. The room exhales. You stare at the assistant. She doesn't look at you, just returns to her seat, opens a scroll, and begins copying a recipe for fig paste that might also be a summoning ritual. You're not sure anymore what's real. You pick up your next scroll. This one is simply titled Clouds and Other Deceptions. The opening line, What is a sky but an unreliable promise? You sigh. You write. The ink glides a little smoother this time. Your hand doesn't cramp. You find a rhythm. The assistant walks by again and, for the first time, leaves something beside you. A fresh reed quill, sharpened, weighted. You glance up. She's already gone, but the ghost of a smile lingers behind her like incense. You turn the new quill between your fingers like it's a magic wand. And in a way, it is. Sharper, smoother, strangely balanced. Like someone finally believed your hands could be trusted and not to ruin parchment by merely existing. You dip it into the ink. It hums across the surface of the scroll like a whisper through silk. For a fleeting, golden moment, you feel like a real scribe, the kind who gets remembered in footnotes and dramatic reenactments, until the scroll you're working on decides it's had enough and rolls itself shut with such defiance it knocks over your candle. Wax spills. Ink dribbles. You sigh with the long-suffering dignity of someone whose ancestors clearly made poor vocational choices. You prop everything back up and catch the assistant watching, her head tilted, eyebrow raised. That same unreadable expression, mild disdain mixed with a whisper of, You'll live. Back to work. This scroll is different. Thicker parchment, strange symbols along the edge. Smells like oregano. It's titled Treatise on Celestial Behavior, which sounds scientific until you start reading. The first paragraph is a detailed diagram of the moon. The second is a sonnet about longing. The third is either an equation or a grocery list for wine, figs, and something called sky powder. You're unsure if it's astronomy or a recipe for ancient ayahuasca. You lean closer, trying to puzzle it out. The handwriting is clean, elegant, obsessive. Then you realize it's a copy of a copy of a copy. You can see the faint bleed through of earlier scripts underneath. Generations of tired hands, each one slightly misinterpreting the last. It's like academic telephone, except now you have to decipher whether the moon was descending or just sad. Historians still argue whether texts like this were ever meant to be taken literally. Some say they were metaphors for inner journeys. Others argue they were the equivalent of posting late night shower thoughts with too much poetic flair and not enough proofreading. You keep copying. The assistant walks past again, this time muttering, "Make sure the margins breathe." You blink, not sure whether that's a metaphor or literal instruction. Either way, you leave space, just in case. Mid-scroll, you hear a thud, then another. Someone has dropped a stack of wax tablets. Again, you glance over. It's the novice, young enough to still have hope in his posture. He tries to gather them quickly, but wax doesn't stack well after it's been scribbled on in 26 dialects and left near heat. The tablets slide, smear, and stick together. The assistant appears behind him. She doesn't yell. She just sighs the sigh of 1,000 librarians before her, the sound of papyrus dying inside. She crouches, picks up a tablet, and gently, carefully, peels 2 pages apart using the blunt end of a quill, and more patience than the gods ever had for humans. "Let the wax cool," she murmurs. The novice nods. He looks like he might cry. You want to pat him on the shoulder, but your fingers are stained with purple ink from the scroll labeled "Color Experiments Don't Touch." So you reconsider. Back at your table, you realize you haven't eaten. Again, there's no scheduled lunch. You're supposed to snack in silence. You reach into your satchel and produce what once was an apple. It's now more philosophy than fruit. You chew it anyway. The assistant passes once more, eyes flicking toward your apple-shaped sorrow, then away. She doesn't comment. That's somehow worse. The candle at your elbow flickers violently, sending shadows leaping across the wall like interpretive dancers, reenacting existential dread. You squint at the page. You've written the same line twice. You cross it out and immediately regret it. Now the parchment looks embarrassed. You try to fix it. Now it just looks guilty. Eventually, you roll up the scroll and mark it complete, even though both of you know it's lying. The assistant reappears. She picks it up, weighs it in her hands like a melon at the market. Then, with a solemn nod, she files it in the crate marked acceptable. You beam, and then she hands you another scroll. This one has no title, just a single word scrawled at the top. Index. You open it. It's a mess. No, you are a mess. But this scroll is worse. Sentences start mid-thought. Sections jump from herbal medicine to planetary motion to an angry letter about grain prices. It's like someone used the scroll as a journal, a reference manual, and possibly a murder confession. You look up, horrified. The assistant shrugs. You ask, "What am I supposed to do with this?" She answers, deadpan, "Organize it." You briefly consider defenestration. Then remember the library has no windows. Of course it doesn't. So you begin. You make piles. You number the sections. You try to make sense of whether dancing goats falls under agriculture, folklore, or threats. Eventually, you give it its own category, unknown but enthusiastic. And slowly, through ink blurred eyes, you start to see the pattern. The chaos has rhythm. The madness has footnotes. The library breathes. You breathe with it. And just when you're about to stand and stretch, for the first time in 9 hours, the assistant walks by and mutters, "Don't forget the addendum." You sit back down. Naturally, you wake up with your face on a scroll and your mouth tasting vaguely of ink and disappointment. Your neck is at a 45-degree angle, medically inadvisable, and your right arm is asleep, possibly forever. You sit up slowly, blinking at the parchment stuck to your cheek. The assistant has kindly placed a candle stub nearby, or maybe it just fell over. Either way, the wax has pooled next to your elbow, like a passive aggressive reminder that you missed your own bedtime. Around you, the scriptorium still hums. There is no off button in an ancient library, no closing bell. The only indicator that time has passed is how much wax is on the floor and how many people have fallen asleep sitting upright. One scribe appears to be dreaming of vowels. Another is murmuring in Greek, possibly cursing, possibly composing poetry. You blink at your new assignment. It's poetry. Of course it is. And not just any poetry, ancient bureaucratic poetry. Odes to harvest schedules, verses lamenting supply chains, an erotic stanza about grain taxes. The scroll is titled Songs of the Storage Room and includes a tragic sonnet about moldy lentils. You sigh deeply, the kind of sigh that echoes through time. You get to work. The lines are written in rhyming couplets, though the rhyme scheme has clearly suffered from multiple bad translations and at least one vengeful copyist. Still, there's something oddly soothing about transcribing a ballad in which the protagonist is emotionally ruined by improperly stacked amphorae. Halfway through stanza 3, you notice a small drawing in the margin, a sheep, wearing what might be sunglasses. You blink. It's definitely there. No explanation. No label. Just a confident sheep, vibing in the middle of a poem about crop rotation. You circle it, as a historian would. You have no idea what it means, but you're not letting it go unnoticed. Future scholars will thank you, or curse you. Either way, your legacy is sealed. Historians still argue whether marginalia like this were intentional commentary, idle doodles, or coded insults aimed at rival copyists. One theory suggests that sheep might have represented stubborn bureaucrats. Another posits that the sheep is just, well, a sheep with really strong vibes. You finish the scroll and go to place it in the verse and agriculture crate, but it's full. Of course it is. You try MISC, emotional texts, also full. You find a crate labeled too confusing to categorize and gently lower it in. The sheep gives you strength. You return to your seat to find a new scroll already waiting for you. It's thick, heavy, bound with a frayed purple cord. There's a faded label that simply says special. You unroll it carefully. It's a personal log from a library assistant who worked here over 200 years ago. The handwriting is sharp, slanted, and utterly fed up. You read aloud softly to yourself. Day 43, scholar from Athens asked for scroll on stars. Handed him recipe for medicinal stew. He didn't notice. Wrote a whole treatise. We'll leave it in astrology pile. Day 66, moved all scrolls from general wisdom to probably just gossip. Felt right. Day 103, spent an hour pretending not to know where the scroll on eclipses was, even though it was in my sleeve. Some days, you need victories. You stop, grin. Whoever this person was, they understood. Deeply. You keep reading. Day 147. Young scribe tried to organize by subject. Chaos, absolute chaos. We file by intent, not content. Rookie mistake. You look around at the madness. The pigeon feather filing system. The scrolls sorted by heartbreak. The shelf labeled things we meant to finish. It all makes a strange, terrifying kind of sense. You set the assistant's journal aside. A precious scroll, one that deserves to be misfiled somewhere meaningful. Suddenly there's a commotion. One of the scribes is standing on a stool, holding a scroll above his head and shouting, "It's real! It's real!" The assistant glides over like a shadow with opinions. She takes the scroll, reads it silently, then hands it back and says, "That's a laundry list, Hector." The scribe deflates, sits back down, begins copying it anyway, out of sheer pride. You continue your work. The candle beside you flickers, and you realize the wax drip is now tall enough to be considered an architectural feature. The scroll in front of you is written in code, or maybe just poor spelling. Either way, it's difficult. You suspect it's meant to be a catalog of stars, but every third word is replaced with a drawing. Some are obvious: sun, moon, wheat. Others, less so. You pause at one that looks like a fish juggling lemons. You tilt your head. You tilt the scroll. Still unclear. You copy it exactly. No interpretation, no judgment, just preservation. That's the job. You hear a distant sneeze, followed by a muttered, "Blessed be Thoth," and the assistant's death stare slicing through the silence. You write faster. Eventually, you stand to stretch. You've copied 4 scrolls, misinterpreted 2, and possibly contributed to the mythologizing of a grocery list. Your back cracks, like an old book spine. The assistant walks past you once more. She pauses. Then she hands you a small wax tablet. On it, a crude smiley face. You look at her. She looks away. You smile anyway, because maybe, just maybe, you're getting better at this. You don't know what time it is. Time has lost all meaning. It might be morning. It might be next Thursday. The only clock in this library is the slow descent of wax and the assistant's increasingly judgmental posture. You begin to suspect that she doesn't age like the rest of us. She just absorbs candle smoke and grows more powerful. You return to your bench, where your next scroll awaits, unrolled, half translated, and accompanied by a note in red ink that simply says, "Try again. This time read it." You blink. You'd been so sure of your previous translation. It was titled Movements of the Celestial Sphere. You'd rendered it into passable Latin, complete with diagrams and a tasteful dedication to the gods. But apparently, you translated the word for orbit as noodle, and the assistant wasn't impressed by your theory that Venus had a boiling pasta phase. You roll your shoulders and try again. This time, you read slowly, carefully. You begin to realize that the scroll was not a treatise on astronomy, but in fact a meditation manual. The celestial movements weren't literal stars. They were metaphorical emotions. The boiling wasn't pasta. It was the soul. You slap your forehead, quietly, respectfully, like someone who just got roasted by a 3rd century philosopher from beyond the grave. The assistant passes by and drops a sticky note made of wax. It reads, "See? Intent matters." You sigh and keep copying. Across the room, another assistant is arguing with a scribe over whether a scroll belongs in fables or political theory. You listen in. It's a story about a talking dog who overthrows a corrupt city council. Exactly. It's clearly satire. Then shelve it under prophecy. You nod silently. That's fair. You glance back at your scroll. You're beginning to notice something strange. The ink, it shimmers. Not dramatically, not like a Harry Potter moment, but subtly, like it's ever so slightly alive. It catches the candlelight and flickers as you move your head. You rub your eyes. You look again. Yep, still flickering. You whisper, "Is this cursed?" A voice behind you answers, only mildly. You jump. It's the assistant. She doesn't smile, just hands you a small pouch filled with something gritty. Sand? For drying ink? And for curses? You nod. You don't ask further questions. That way lies madness. You finish copying the scroll, this time correctly, and mark the title as Emotional Astronomy. You add an asterisk with a footnote. May also apply to soup, just in case. Your next assignment is less glamorous. The assistant places a giant bundle of scrolls in front of you and says only, "Rebind." You blink. "Is that sewing?" She nods. You stare at the pile. These scrolls have been through war, torn, flaking, some with suspicious bite marks. You unwrap a piece of linen to find a scroll half eaten and fully judged by time. You sigh and begin. Ancient rebinding involves string, glue made from boiled hooves, and an intimate understanding of frustration. You gently align the edges. You stitch them together like someone performing surgery on a paper patient. You try not to sneeze, lest 200 years of ink blow away into the abyss. One scroll is completely blank. You look at the assistant, confused. She shrugs. It's a placeholder. For memory. You nod solemnly, pretending that makes sense. You sew it anyway. While rebinding a scroll titled Herbs for Dreams and Other Illnesses, you discover a note tucked in the folds. If you found this, you're probably looking for the real scroll. I hid it under the codices labeled Weather and Regret. Good luck. Also, don't trust Jerome. You pause. You scan the room. There are at least 3 men who might be named Jerome. One is snoring into a clay tablet. Another is scratching something into the wall that looks like a map. The third is definitely eating glue. You file that information away, carefully, alongside your growing list of mildly concerning observations. The rebinding continues. One scroll falls apart completely in your hands, not due to age, but due to a beetle that scuttles out mid unwrap and gives you a look like, "How dare you?" You gasp. The assistant appears and smashes it with a rolled up epic poem. Doesn't flinch. Returns the scroll to you. "Start over," she says, and disappears. Your fingers ache. Your back burns. But the glue sets beautifully. The scrolls, once sad and broken, now sit neatly in a row, like ducklings who've been to therapy. You feel proud, until one of the elder scholars picks one up, sniffs it, and mutters, "Too much hoof." You ignore him. You've earned a break. You go outside for a breath of air, or at least to stand by the outer wall, where fresh air is rumored to exist. The stone is cool against your back. You close your eyes. Listen. From inside, faint whispers. Scribes debating the morality of figs. A scroll unrolling itself in protest. The assistant humming what sounds like an ancient funeral dirge. But in a nice way. You exhale. Return to the scriptorium, and waiting for you on your bench, a small scroll. New, crisp, ink still wet. Your name is on it. You pick it up, heart thudding. Inside the words, "You lasted longer than most. Keep writing. A." You smile. Not a big one, just enough to notice. And then, without a word, you get back to work. You resume your seat with something dangerously close to enthusiasm, the note still clutched in your sleeve like a secret spell. You've endured 7 scrolls, 3 ink spills, 2 ghost rodents, and 1 metaphysical sheep. And now, dare you say it, you're beginning to understand the rhythm of this place. But your next assignment throws that all out the window, which is ironic, because this scroll is about windows. Sort of. The title reads Architectural Openings and Other Liminal Truths. You brace yourself. It begins straightforwardly enough. Descriptions of different window shapes, arches, slits, oculi. Then it veers. Paragraph 2 begins discussing how light is a form of divine accusation. Paragraph 3 suggests that a poorly placed window can invite demons and poorly timed birds. By paragraph 5, the author is no longer describing structures but something called spiritual drafts. And then you find a section written entirely in reverse, as if the writer feared the window might read back. You copy each line faithfully, silently questioning your own sanity. You reach the middle of the scroll and realize the ink changes color. Faint green, possibly made from crushed moss or spite. It smells like sadness and oregano. Your hand cramps. Your candle gutter flutters dangerously. And then a gust of wind, wherefrom you don't know, blows across the scriptorium and knocks over a full stack of unfiled scrolls labeled theories. They scatter like confetti at a philosopher's birthday party. The assistant appears instantly. You freeze mid-word, ink dripping from your quill like suspense. She surveys the chaos, then turns slowly to the nearest scribe and says, Fetch the sorting box. The scribe, possibly Jerome, possibly the glue eater, bolts. And now the ritual begins. The sorting. Scrolls are picked up one by one, sniffed, weighed, occasionally licked. Though that part's unofficial, you are conscripted into helping. Of course you are. You lift a scroll that's cracked open along the middle like a baguette. Inside, a fragment of a treatise on the emotional capacity of geese. You show it to the assistant. She considers, then files it under aggression. Another scroll features a diagram of concentric circles, annotated with what might be numerology or a poorly played game of hopscotch. You don't ask. You file it under ambiguities. A third scroll contains only the word no, written in 35 different handwritings. You ask, should I file this? She nods. Absolutely, under consensus. You get through half the stack before someone finds a scroll written in two languages at once. One side Greek, the other side something vaguely resembling early Welsh. It seems to be a debate between the same person. You open it and find a note in the margin. Past me was wrong. Present me is also wrong. Future me will be smug. You file it under time travel, emotional. After the scroll explosion is recontained, you return to your own bench and find your original window scroll sulking beneath a blotter. You pick up where you left off. Now the author is ranting about shutters, not metaphorically, literal shutters. To close a shutter is to deny the eye of the world. To open it is to allow critique from birds. You're unsure if this person needed more sunlight or fewer fermented dates. Still, you copy. You draw the diagrams. You even preserve the odd smiley face someone penciled in next to the word lintel. You wonder if that was the original author or a prankster assistant from the previous century, or maybe a window ghost. It all feels plausible now. You glance up. The assistant is watching. She nods toward a crate. You understand. You place your completed scroll gently into Architectural Whispers. It's heavier than you remember. Back at your desk, your next task is a collection of letters. Love letters. But not the romantic kind. Letters to scrolls. You blink. The first one opens with, Dear Commentary on Aristotle's Ethics. I miss you terribly. The next, To my dearest annals of Boethius, you were misfiled, but never forgotten. They go on like that. Emotional, sincere, strangely poetic. You're not sure if it's a joke or a new literary genre. Some are clearly dramatic. One threatens to set fire to an entire shelf if my darling catalog of lunar fishings isn't returned. Another is a whispered apology. I shouldn't have used you as a coaster. I was young. You transcribe each one with the reverence they demand. At the end of the stack is a final letter, different handwriting, to the scroll I never got to finish. I hope you found someone gentler. You pause. The assistant is standing nearby, her back turned, adjusting the placement of a scroll on the shelf. You don't say anything. You just fold the last letter and tuck it inside the scroll you're working on. You title it Correspondence, Miss Tender. Later, as you prepare to extinguish your candle and stretch your spine back into a vertical human shape, the assistant walks by and places a fresh scroll on your desk. No label, just a sticky wax seal. You look at her, question in your eyes. She answers only, "Tomorrow's dream. Don't open until then." And just like that, she disappears into the stacks once more, part librarian, part legend, part ghost. And you sit there, in a library that feels more like a heartbeat than a building, watching the candle melt into memory. The sealed scroll sits on your desk like a challenge, or a trap, or a really boring birthday present. You stare at it for what might be 15 minutes, or an entire moon phase, then do the responsible thing. You don't open it. Instead, you get to work on the scroll the assistant did leave unsealed, a census record from a village so small it's only mentioned in two sources, one of which is probably fictional. The scroll lists names, occupations, quantities of livestock, and an unsettling number of notes about incidents involving eels. You copy the names with care: Lucius, the goat wrangler; Fabia, the comb maker; Marcellus, the occasional mystic, each one etched in ink and soft panic. Then you come across a peculiar note, entry removed by order of the assistant. Your head tilts instinctively. There's no date, no name, just a blank line where a villager should have been. You glance toward the assistant, who is currently balancing on a three-legged stool, reorganizing a shelf labeled Speculation Culinary. You consider asking, then remember the library's first rule. If something was removed by an assistant, it stays removed. Historians still argue whether such redactions were acts of censorship, clerical errors, or passive-aggressive battles between rival librarians. There's even a conspiracy theory that ancient assistants maintained their own secret catalog, filled with scrolls too strange, too honest, or too hilarious for general circulation. Some believe those scrolls are buried under the floorboards. Others say they're hidden in plain sight, disguised as lists of pottery taxes. You return to the census. It includes a goose situation section, which you assume is some kind of livestock inventory. But the descriptions read more like eyewitness accounts. One honked at the priest during sermon, bit the centurion's helmet, no provocation, missing, possibly scheming. You carefully preserve all three entries, labeling them behavioral anomalies. The scroll ends with a farewell poem to a beloved donkey named Minerva. It's weirdly moving. You place the completed scroll in the crate titled Demographics with Emotion. Then you look back at the sealed one. It glows faintly in the candlelight, but you resist. Instead, you decide to help with reshelving. The assistant tosses you a bundle of scrolls labeled Things Someone Thought Were Important. You begin sorting. One scroll contains a 4,000-word argument about whether a puddle qualifies as a water source. Another is a transcription of an ancient stand-up comedy set, complete with laugh notations. Pause for chuckle. Repeat joke louder. This part needs goat sound. You shelve it under performance theory. Then you find a scroll that's just a collection of opening lines. Nothing more. Dozens of beginnings. It was a moonless night when the papyrus screamed. The fish knew too much, and that was the problem. She opened the jar and regretted everything, including breakfast. Each line is beautiful, ridiculous, or both. None of them go anywhere. No endings, just doors with no rooms. You copy them anyway, whispering a few aloud as you do. They feel like wishes someone made and forgot to take back. You reach the bottom of the pile and discover a scroll entirely written in pictograms. You squint. It seems to tell the story of a merchant, a lion, and an exploding fruit. Or maybe it's a warning. You file it under interpretation hazardous. As you're reshelving, you hear a loud thump. A crate has collapsed. Not just any crate, one from the contested theories section. Scrolls roll in every direction. Titles like Gravity is Mood Based and The Moon is Actually Sad Cheese scatter across the floor. The assistant materializes from the shadows and stares. You brace for impact, but instead, she sighs, picks up a scroll titled Why Hats Are Dangerous, and says, "You deal with this. Consider it a test." You nod. You begin sorting based on vibe. Scrolls that seem silly but earnest go into one pile. Scrolls that are clearly the product of late night wine and quill accidents go into another. One scroll is entirely about how dreams are just echoes from Atlantis. You don't even argue. You label it hopeful nonsense and move on. Eventually, the assistant returns, surveys your piles, and mutters, "Close enough," which from her is basically a standing ovation. She hands you a new candle stub and says nothing. You return to your desk, basking in the warm glow of being almost competent. Then she taps the sealed scroll once and walks away. You take the hint. Gently, reverently, you break the wax seal. Inside is a single phrase. "Copy this without editing." You blink. That's it? Then you notice the phrase, "The assistant is always right." You chuckle. You pick up your quill, and without hesitation, you copy the sentence 39 times in different scripts with careful flourishes. You make it look regal, scientific, poetic. One version is upside down. One is in the shape of a goat. One glows faintly. You don't ask how. When you're done, you hand it to her. She reads it, nods, files it under truths, uncomfortable. And for the first time since you arrived, she says, "Good work." You nearly cry. Then she adds, "Don't get used to it." Balance is restored. Your fingers are ink stained. Your brain is full of questionable Latin. Your spine has made a formal complaint. And yet, there is peace in the madness. Or maybe you've just grown numb. Either way, when the assistant hands you a new scroll and says, "Don't mess this one up," you take it as a compliment. You unroll it. It's not text, it's drawings, diagrams of machines, tools, inventions, each more improbable than the last. There's a crank operated butter cooler, a scroll flattening device powered by a frustrated chicken, and what appears to be a catapult specifically designed for bread delivery. At the top, in ornate lettering, "Devices that did not work, but we tried." You're immediately in love. Each diagram is labeled with a name, a purpose, and an unfortunate outcome. The air spoon, designed to stir breezes for those too warm, resulted in 3 broken wrists and mild public panic. The book rotator allowed a reader to turn pages without hands, primarily useful for people with soup. The echo funnel claimed to capture compliments and replay them. Instead, amplified self-doubt. You chuckle softly as you copy each one. The assistant watches from a distance, arms crossed, pretending not to smile. Historians still argue whether these drawings were satirical, aspirational, or sincere attempts by a deeply bored inventor named Urius, who apparently once tried to patent the concept of ideas. His signature appears frequently, often underlined aggressively. You pause at one device, a complicated structure of ropes, weights, and pulleys titled the Sleep Encourager. Its purpose? To nudge people gently into rest during long readings. Its outcome? Multiple concussions, one lawsuit, unresolved. You wonder if you could build one now. You glance toward the assistant. She holds up a hammer. You decide against it. Your next scroll is a series of anonymous complaints. Yes, complaints. Apparently, the ancient library had a suggestion box. What you're holding is a preserved list of grievances scrawled in 6 different handwritings, each angrier than the last. Scroll labeled How to Predict Weather just says, Look up. Assistant told me to file under ambience. What does that even mean? Table in scriptorium wobbles. Probably cursed. Goose still loose? Why is everything sticky? We need more candles and less Jerome. You transcribe them all, tears of laughter welling as you go. You add a footnote. Candles, later found, hoarded in crate labeled light mist. The assistant reads over your shoulder, says nothing, then walks away, muttering, It was wobbly. The next scroll is even stranger. It contains nothing, at first glance anyway, but when you tilt it under candlelight, you see faint etchings, possibly lemon juice. It's an ancient invisibility technique used by spies, poets, and passive aggressive philosophers. You decode slowly. The first words emerge. You who read this have nothing better to do. Charming. The rest unfolds into a series of questions, not answers. Questions. If a scroll is copied perfectly, is it still a scroll or a mirror? If knowledge is preserved but never read, is it alive? If an assistant rolls her eyes and no one sees, does it still count? You write them all, and you wonder, your next task, organization. The assistant gives you a crate and says, These are unsorted. Fix it. Inside are 37 scrolls. Titles include Meditations, While Waiting for Beans, On the Ethics of Sandals, What I Saw. During the eclipse, mostly birds, I don't read this scroll. You try your best. You make piles. One for philosophical weather, one for livestock drama, one for miscellaneous despair. But some defy classification. You hold up a scroll that appears to be a dream journal written entirely in haiku. Another contains a recipe for bread, followed immediately by instructions for summoning a mildly amused forest spirit. You look up. The assistant is watching you. She holds up a new sign, File by Intent. You nod again. Eventually, you create a new crate labeled Moments of Human Confusion. You feel oddly proud of that. As you're preparing to finish, a young scribe runs by carrying a scroll above their head like it's on fire. They shout, I found the lost ending. Everyone freezes. Even the assistant turns. The scroll is unrolled onto the largest table. Scribes and assistants gather. It's supposedly the missing final section of a long forgotten epic, one involving prophecy, betrayal, and a goat named Marnus. You read over the shoulder of a tall guy who smells like rosemary. The scroll says, And in the end, nothing was solved, but the goat survived. The end. Silence. Then the assistant flatly, We can work with that. You return to your seat. The sun is setting, or maybe rising. The shadows on the wall grow long. Your candle has become more wax than flame, but the library hums on, quietly, faithfully. And next to your bench, a small bundle, your name on it. Inside, a fresh quill, a biscuit wrapped in cloth, and a note that reads, Still not bad, keep going. You exhale. And then, just as a new scroll is placed in your hands, you begin again. The scroll you're handed next is curiously slim, thin parchment, no title, tied with a thread that looks suspiciously like it came from someone's tunic hem. You untie it, unroll it with care, and find A list. That's it. A single sprawling list, written in neat, slanted script. You scan the first few lines. Pingila, things I meant to learn, in no particular order. How to read Etruscan. The name of that assistant, with the nice handwriting. Why figs are always sticky. How to politely disagree with Plato. How not to flinch when geese make eye contact. You blink. This is someone's private ambition scroll. Half bucket list, half internal monologue. You read on. 17. Translate a dream. 18. Spell rhetoric without checking. 19. Kiss someone in the scriptorium without being reported. 20. Learn what the Grand Archivist does all day besides loom. You smile without meaning to, and then you begin to copy. It feels wrong at first, too personal. But halfway through the list, you find an entry that reads, 32. Leave a trace, even if it's a weird one. So you continue. Every misspelled word, every line scratched out and rewritten, you preserve. Even the smudge where a tear might have fallen, or maybe just too much fig jam. At the bottom of the list, there's a final entry. 43. Write something worth finding. You pause. Then, in the margin, you quietly add, you did. You roll it up gently and place it in the crate labeled Unsorted Bravery. You don't tell anyone. Your next scroll isn't damp. That's never a good sign. It's labeled Ship Manifest, possibly cursed, in a hasty scrawl. You open it with the caution of someone who once got sneezed on by a mildew-ridden poem. Inside, a full inventory of a merchant ship from the eastern ports, crates of saffron, amphorae of olive oil, something described ominously as whispering figs. You begin copying with the faintest feeling of being watched by the scroll itself. Then come the oddities. 3 barrels, unmarked, occasionally warm. Box of glass eyes, decorative. 1 passenger, unnamed, refused to speak except in riddles. You glance around the room. No one else seems to find this odd. The assistant walks by and says, don't forget the postscript. You flip to the end. All cargo accounted for, except for the dreams. Those escaped. You look up. She's already gone. Historians still argue whether such manifests were factual or dramatized by bored scribes, hoping to get attention or avoid it, depending on the supervisor. Some insist that dreams refer to cargo lost at sea. Others say it was metaphorical. A few fringe thinkers argue it referred to literal bottled dreams, traded in hush-hush circles. You finish the manifest. You file it under logistics, vaguely haunted. The next scroll is barely held together. You're about to send it to the rebinding pile when you notice something odd. There's writing between the lines. Literally. Tiny, sideways script inked into the gaps of a completely different text. You squint. You adjust the candlelight. You hold the scroll at a ridiculous angle, the kind that makes your spine issue a cease and desist. Slowly, the hidden writing reveals itself. It's a conversation, not between people, but between scribes. Hidden messages left in the margins across decades, like an eternal hallway whisper. This line is nonsense, but I dare not erase it. I corrected the Latin, but not the ego. If you're reading this, I hope you're having a better day than I did. You laugh. You add your own small line. Still here, still scribbling, still human. You know it may never be seen again, but you write it anyway. Later, the assistant silently places a new scroll on your desk. This one bears the seal of the Grand Archivist himself. You feel the tension in your teeth before you even open it. The scroll is thick, textured, suspiciously warm. It smells like dust, ink, and faint menace. The title, Index of Theories Not to be Pursued. You begin reading. Each entry is stranger than the last. Theory number 7. The moon is shy and avoids crowds. Theory number 19. Scrolls reproduce in the dark. Theory number 26. The assistant is immortal. Unconfirmed, don't ask. You look up sharply. The assistant is staring at the ceiling as if she knows. You copy carefully, resisting the urge to add your own theory. You're tempted to propose that all missing quills migrate seasonally to a secret island of stationery. At the bottom of the scroll is a note. If you are reading this, you are now responsible for adding to it. You panic. You pause. You write. Theory chapter 44. Sometimes we make things up just to feel real. You roll the scroll gently and place it in the restricted pile. The assistant appears, takes one look, and mutters, "Nice phrasing." You beam. She doesn't smile back, but she does hand you a fresh quill and a slice of bread. You don't ask where it came from. You eat. And you write, because that's what you do here. And maybe, just maybe, it matters. The bread is warm, and you're not entirely sure how. There's no oven in the scriptorium. There isn't even a kitchen. You consider asking, but then remember Rule 3 of ancient libraries. Never question the origin of surprise snacks. You wipe your hands on a spare blotter and get back to it. Today's assignment is a scroll wrapped in what looks suspiciously like someone's laundry. It smells of time and unresolved conflict. The wax seal is partially melted, making the label nearly unreadable. You squint. It says something like, "Collected sayings of the people who say things." You unroll it. It's a mess. Half wisdom, half gibberish, and entirely chaotic. You begin to copy. A fool and his scrolls are soon alphabetized. The loudest crier spills the least ink. If you stare too long into the candle stares back. Never trust a man whose sandals squeak in silence. You pause. That last one feels personal. The sayings are grouped loosely, sometimes by theme, weather, hunger, metaphorical cheese, and sometimes seemingly at random. There's a whole section labeled Advice from People Who Were Probably Drunk, which includes, when in doubt, moo like the cow. Don't marry anyone who alphabetizes love. The sky owes you nothing, but may send coupons. You transcribe them all faithfully, fighting the urge to add your own. A good assistant gives you tasks. A great one gives you bread. Across the room, another scribe is trying to explain to the assistant why he's alphabetized the scrolls by emotional temperature. She stares at him so hard his candle goes out. You return to your desk and find your inkwell is empty. You stand, stretch, and make your way to the ink distribution shelf. A structure so unstable it defies engineering, physics, and hope. You locate a half-full bottle, labeled "Definitely not poison," probably ink. You unscrew it. Smell it. Cautiously. It's purple, very purple. You bring it back, and just as you dip your quill into it, a tiny voice in the back of your head whispers, "This will not end well." You ignore it. Because deadlines. The ink is surprisingly smooth. The scroll begins to look like it was written by royalty or someone with excellent cuticles. But then something odd happens. As you write, the letters begin to shimmer again, but not like last time. This time they move, just slightly. Just enough that when you blink, the phrase you wrote, "He who hoards wisdom grows mold," now reads, "He who molds wisdom grows bold." You freeze. The assistant walks past, glances down, stops. "You used the purple ink, didn't you?" You nod slowly. She sighs. "It's the interpretive kind." You blink again. "The what?" She gestures. Magical realism, literal ink, comes from the philosopher's wellspring, changes slightly depending on your emotional state while writing. You look down at your last few lines. One says, "Every question is a doorway to a goat." You stare at it. You whisper, "That wasn't what I meant." The assistant shrugs. "It is now." Historians still argue whether this type of ink was a tool for enlightenment or simply an elaborate prank by philosophers who'd run out of arguments. Some believe it reveals truth. Others call it liquid mischief. Either way, you finish the scroll, carefully now, thinking only bland, inoffensive thoughts like bread and linen and dust. Your next scroll is worse. It's a table of contents, but not for any specific text. It's just a list of potential scroll titles. Nothing else. What the sun forgot to mention. Errors in the shape of a man. Why the stars keep secrets. Memoirs of a cursed shoe. On the unexpected gravity of beans. There are over 200 entries, no actual scrolls, just imagined ones. You begin copying them, line by line. Slowly you realize these aren't just titles, they're invitations, echoes of scrolls that were planned, dreamed of, started but never completed. You add a small note at the bottom, each title a key to a lock that no longer exists. The assistant reads it, doesn't comment, but she files it in the rarest crate of all. Unwritten, yet remembered. You feel something twist gently in your chest. Maybe pride, maybe nostalgia for something you never read. You're startled out of your haze by the sound of someone gasping. A novice has just spilled a jar of gold leaf. Tiny flakes scatter like fairy dust over half a scroll. The assistant appears instantly, wielding a broom and that face. The scroll is saved, the novice is not. You volunteer to recopy it. The assistant looks at you, for once, with an expression that might be mistaken for kindness in low light. The scroll is a record of lunar omens. You copy each line carefully, including the tiny gold smudges where the leaf refused to be removed. The margins sparkle with unintended glory. You title it, "The Moon Now Fancy," and file it under Celestial Events, mildly upgraded. Just before nightfall, or maybe it's dawn again, you are handed a strange object. A clay tablet, a real one. It's older than anything you've handled. Cracked, ancient, heavy. The writing on it is cuneiform and completely beyond your skill level. You look up, confused. The assistant says only, "Make it sing." You frown. Then you understand. You don't need to translate it. You need to honor it. So you create a scroll, not a translation, but an echo, a poetic imagining of what the tablet might say if it could whisper. You write, "Before the ink, before the parchment, there was clay and fire. There were hands pressing memory into mud and silence waiting to speak." You place your version next to the tablet. The assistant looks at both. She nods. And incredibly, she says, "Beautiful." You're about to cry. You settle for pretending there's something in your eye. Your hands tremble slightly as you return the ancient tablet to its resting place. Not from fear or fatigue, but from something deeper. An odd reverence. As if, for the first time, you fully understand that the work you're doing isn't just copying old thoughts. It's listening, remembering, translating humanity across time with a slightly cramping wrist. The assistant doesn't say anything. She just gives you a new scroll. This one is tied with ribbon. Ribbon. You stare at it like it just sang you a love song. It's red, slightly frayed, with a tiny knot that seems unnecessarily elegant. You undo it carefully, suspecting a trap, or worse, poetry. You were right. The scroll is titled Odes to the Unread. You sigh and begin. Each entry is a poem written to a scroll that's never been opened. Love letters to forgotten knowledge. Lamentations for sealed wisdom. Apologies to lost pages. O scroll, beneath the 6 shelf's weight, forgive us for the years you waited. For ink you hold and truths you grip that never touched a reader's lip. It's dramatic. It's a little much, but you get it. You've seen crates labeled Misk and Left Behind. You've watched scrolls gather dust as their neighbors get recopied for the fifth time. There is hierarchy in history, and some knowledge, no matter how lovely, just doesn't get a turn. You copy each ode with patience. The assistant passes and says, "Take your time," which might be the kindest thing she's ever said. You finish, seal it with wax, and label it Literary Guilt Deluxe. Then, for no reason other than instinct, you open the bottom drawer of your desk. Inside, another scroll. No one told you it was there. You unroll it, blank. You blink. And then, ever so slowly, faint words begin to appear, written in a style eerily similar to your own. They're your notes from yesterday. But they've changed. Your scribbled phrase, probably haunted, now reads, definitely worth remembering. You lean in closer. Historians still argue whether ancient scrolls could absorb ambient thought. Some believe certain inks were mixed with herbs that responded to heat, touch, or even emotion. Others believe the assistants just rewrote them when no one was looking. You suspect both are true. The next scroll is titled simply, Conversations We Never Had. You brace yourself. It's a dialogue between two people who clearly never met. One speaks in questions, the other in riddles. They argue about time, memory, and the ethics of labeling scrolls miscellaneous. What is history? A shadow cast by a candle you forgot to light. And what of the future? An unrolled scroll, still warm with possibility. You copy it line by line. As you do, you start hearing the voices in your head. Gentle, curious, somehow familiar. You add a line of your own. Maybe this was our conversation after all. And file it under metaphysical drift. The next task is a bundle of loose fragments. Nothing complete. Just torn scroll corners, partial lines, and ink blots that once had ambition. You're instructed to reassemble if possible. Imagine if not. You smile. This is your favorite kind of chaos. The fragments range wildly. Some are technical. Angle of goat hoof in plowing. Others are romantic. And when she looked at me, I forgot even the stars. One might be a shopping list. One might be a war declaration. One is just the word oops in very elegant script. You do your best. You stitch them together not with logic, but with tone, mood, hope. What emerges is something wholly new. Oops, I loved her, despite the goats, and when the plow broke, so did the sky. I blamed the stars. They said nothing. You pause. You have no idea what you just created, but it feels like a poem. You title it, Assembled Feelings. The assistant passes by, glances down, and says, I'd read that. You nearly fall off your stool. You recover. You move on. The next scroll is unusually loud, not in sound but in presence. It demands attention. It's titled List of Forbidden Scrolls, redacted. You feel the adrenaline kick in. You read, Scroll number 2, redacted. Do not unseal. Contains opinions about onions. Dangerous. Scroll number 8, redacted. Still missing. Possibly in crate labeled Goose Theology. Scroll number 13, redacted, wrote itself. Scroll number 21, redacted, smelled like ambition, burned itself in protest. You copy them all, including the parts crossed out, especially the parts crossed out. At the end is a note. If you find this list incomplete, add yourself. You hesitate. Then, in small letters, you write, Scroll number 39, Scribe Burberry 147, saw too much, wrote anyway. The ink dries, the scroll curls inward like it knows. You place it in the restricted but fun section. Later that evening, or morning, or whatever the library decides it is now, you find yourself wandering the stacks. There's a corner you've never seen before. lit only by natural light. The scrolls here are bound in fabric, some stitched with thread, others sealed with wax stamps you don't recognize. You reach for one. It crumbles slightly, revealing a message inside. To whoever finds this, I didn't finish, but I started. That has to count for something. You sit, you write a reply on the back. It does. I'm still starting too. You replace it, carefully, quietly, and return to your desk. The assistant walks by and drops something next to you. It's not a scroll. It's a mirror. You see yourself, ink streaked, wide eyed, possibly developing a second set of calluses. She says, "You're part of the library now," and walks away. You stare at your reflection, and for the first time since arriving, you nod. The mirror remains beside you, face up, reflecting the ceiling beams above your desk and the candle stub clinging to life like an overworked librarian. It catches flickers of motion, the assistant passing by, a moth considering philosophy, your own blinking self, and you wonder absurdly if the mirror is now cataloging everything you do. You nudge it under a stack of scrolls, just in case. Today's scroll is different. It's a scroll of questions, not a philosophical treatise or a list of rhetorical flourishes, but literal questions, hundreds of them, line after line, densely packed, most unsigned. You scan a few. Why do we call it a memory when it always changes? Is dust a form of storytelling? What happened to the scroll I lent to Flavius? What's the word for knowing something and still forgetting it? Some are clearly rhetorical. Some are heartbreakingly sincere. One simply reads, "Did she ever read it?" You begin copying, carefully, quietly. The assistant glances over and says, "Ah, the Book of Wonderings." You raise an eyebrow. She adds, "Never finished. Never meant to be." Historians still argue whether the Book of Wonderings was a communal document, a space for scribes and scholars to deposit the thoughts too fragile for footnotes. Some believe it began by accident, when someone forgot to title a scroll and wrote, "What is this for?" at the top. You get to the final few lines, only to discover there's space left. So you add your own. What happens when you run out of scrolls but not thoughts? You don't wait for an answer. You file it under perpetual inquiries. Your next scroll is titled Instructions for Being a Scribe. Do not follow. You already love it. Step 1. Wake up before dawn. Regret everything. Step 2. Sit with quill. Contemplate mortality and the smell of glue. Step 3. Pretend to understand Greek. Smile vaguely. Step 4. Spill ink. Pretend it was on purpose. You snort audibly at step 6. If the assistant glares, offer cheese. If no cheese, offer apology. If no apology, run. You copy each instruction with admiration, adding a few margin notes of your own. Step 8. When in doubt, blame Jerome. As you write, you notice the assistant eyeing the scroll. You tilt it toward her. She reads, then silently slips a wedge of cheese onto your desk. You don't question it. You add step 9. If gifted cheese by assistant, treasure it forever, or until mold develops sapience. The next scroll is labeled Imagine Maps of Places That Don't Exist. You open it and immediately feel dizzy. It's hand-drawn maps, entirely fictional, utterly sincere. There's the Valley of Mispronunciations, the Forgotten Isle of Completed Projects, and a very detailed plan of the Island of the Last Clean Quill. Each map comes with short descriptions. Beware the swamps of overthinking. Foggy, loud. The cliffs of almost remembered rise abruptly. Many fall. The forest of good enough is peaceful, but confusing. You copy each map carefully. You even try drawing one of your own, a tiny peninsula called where that one thought went. The assistant walks by, sees your addition, and says, "North of regret, east of lunch." You nod solemnly. Of course. You file the scroll under cartography internal. Then comes a scroll that's already been heavily annotated, not by one person, but dozens, generations, perhaps. The original text appears to be a philosophical treatise about chairs. Yes, chairs. Their meaning, their function, their moral standing. You begin to transcribe. The act of sitting is a decision to stop moving. But is stillness, surrender, or reflection? But the margins are alive. I disagree. Only if your chair has wheels. My uncle once fell through a stool and saw God. This is nonsense, but poetic nonsense. You copy it all. Main text, snarky responses, drawings of increasingly unhinged chairs. One has wings. One appears to be sentient. You finish and title it Debatable Furniture. Next up is a scroll titled Lullabies for Tired Minds. You pause. The assistant notices, says nothing. You unroll it. It's soft. Not the parchment itself, but the way it's written. Lines written in gentle rhythm, meant to be read aloud at dusk, or whenever hope felt like it had left the building. Sleep now, scribe. The ink can wait. The moon is copying you. The shelves are full, the scrolls are fed, the stars are filing truth. You copy slowly. It feels like exhaling. At the bottom is a postscript. If you find this scroll, it's because you needed it. You close your eyes. You whisper the last lines, and then gently place the scroll in the crate labeled Rest Urgent. The assistant walks by and replaces your candle. A small act. But it says, keep going. Your next task is daunting. A scroll repair gone wrong. Someone tried to copy a damaged scroll and ended up merging 3 separate texts. Now it's a nightmarish blend of Cooking for Solitude, Military Formations of the East, and Beginner's Astrology. You now have to prepare lentils for Mars alignment, flank with olive oil and 3 cavalry units. You laugh. Then you write. Because sometimes absurdity is the most human thing we have. At the end of the scroll, you write, "May the stars bless your stew and your formations," and file it under fusion genres. You lean back, neck popping audibly. The assistant approaches, drops something beside you. A scroll with no writing, just a symbol. The symbol for begin. You stare at it. Then, almost without thinking, you pick up your quill and start. The symbol for begin is simple. 3 lines intersecting like a bird's footprint or a forgotten letter from an alphabet. No one speaks aloud anymore. It doesn't glow. It doesn't hum. It just waits. You stare at the blank scroll beneath it. No title, no instruction. The assistant walks past and, without stopping, murmurs, "It's yours now." Your chest tightens. Because you know what this is. This is a scroll you don't copy. This is a scroll you write. You dip your quill slowly, deliberately. The ink this time is soft brown, something homemade, earthy, trustworthy. You write your name, not the one the assistant calls you, not your catalog number, but your real name, the one that still sounds like possibility. You pause, and then you begin. Today, I remembered that ink can listen, that words can breathe again when written with care, that even in a room full of dust and quiet, you are not alone. It's not poetry. It's not a treatise. It's not for anyone but you. And yet, somehow, it belongs here. More than any perfect copy you've ever made. You fill the scroll halfway before stopping. You leave the rest blank. Because you're not done. And maybe you never will be. You file it gently in a crate labeled In Progress. Gently. The assistant doesn't say a word, but the tiniest smile touches her lips. Next, she hands you a scroll with a wax seal shaped like a snail. You break it open, only to discover it's a field report. A journal written by a traveling scribe who went village to village copying local wisdom. You read, Day 12, a man told me the stars were onions, and I didn't argue. Day 16, I was paid in turnips and a tooth, unsure how to declare that on the inventory. Day 22, spent the day copying a lullaby written for pigs. It works. I napped. The voice is alive. You feel like they're with you, scribbling beside you, laughing quietly at nothing. By day 31, they write, my quill split again. I wept for no reason, then wrote a love letter to the moon. It's fine. You copy every line, preserving the irregular spellings, the grease smudges, the little ink hearts. At the end, a note. If you ever read this, I hope you're also lost and a little happy. You nod. You file it under travelogues, emotional terrain. Then a curious scroll appears on your desk. You didn't see who placed it. You unroll it and find drawings, but not maps, not diagrams. Faces. Hundreds of them. Some joyful, some tired. Some so detailed they feel like old friends. At the top, one sentence. Scribes I met and couldn't forget. You copy each sketch as best you can, your lines slower, more intentional. You wonder who these people were, if they laughed like you do, spilled ink, cursed at the angle of the sunlight. Some are labeled Marcus, who sang to the scrolls, Talitha, who wrote backwards for fun, a boy named Leaf, who stayed one day and never came back. Others remain unnamed. You write below one, might have been me. You file the copy under people, soft echoes. Next comes a scroll labeled Contradictions I've Grown Fond of. Oh yes, this is your speed. You read, I hate copying scrolls, but I love being the one who did. I believe in truth, but I like good lies. I am exhausted. I am home. You nod with each one. You add your own. I don't know if this matters, but I keep showing up. The assistant passes by, sees your edition, and says softly, that's how you know it does. You don't answer. You just write. Then you're handed something unexpected. A scroll sealed with your own handwriting. You freeze. It's dated tomorrow. You open it slowly. Inside a single line. Keep going. You're closer than you think. You stare. You consider asking the assistant how this is possible. You don't. You just copy the message, adding one note of your own. I will. You file it under temporal encouragement. As the candle melts lower, a final scroll appears. No label, just a faint scent of lavender and iron. It begins. In the event of fire, flood, or philosophical collapse. Oh, good. It's the emergency protocol scroll. You continue reading. First, protect the scrolls labeled joy, then save in progress. If time permits, rescue the assistant's tea. You snort, of course. Then the scroll turns surprisingly poetic. And if nothing can be saved, write one last line. Something true. Something beautiful. Something someone might need 100 years from now. You exhale. You write, we were here. We were trying. And we left light behind. You roll the scroll tightly. Label it, if found, read gently, and return to your bench. The mirror you hid earlier is back on the desk. It's clean now. And in it, you see yourself as you are. A scribe, a wanderer, a collector of forgotten sparks. You blink, and in the reflection, just over your shoulder, you think you see the assistant's smile. You wake the next morning, or maybe it's the same day, just rounder, with a scroll stuck to your cheek and the faint outline of a paragraph imprinted on your face. A literal case of sleeping on the job, which the assistant finds hilarious, though she doesn't laugh. She just leaves a small pot of warm water and a clean cloth on your desk and walks away, like she didn't just perform an act of quiet mercy. You splash your face. The paragraph on your cheek vanishes. The memory doesn't. The next scroll is curious, titled Theories on Where Lost Things Go. You expect metaphor. You are not disappointed. Theory 1. They are recruited by stars to become ideas. Theory 3. They fall between seconds, not spaces. Theory 5. The assistant keeps them in a secret drawer labeled Nope. You look up. The assistant avoids eye contact. You copy slowly, relishing each absurdity. There's even a chart detailing the migration habits of lost quills. Migrate north in spring, nest in ceiling beams. You add your own. Theory 12. Lost things are just waiting to be needed again. You file it under Hope Misplaced. The next scroll comes rolled in bark, tied with dried vines. You crack it open and sneeze. It smells aggressively herbal. Inside, recipes for situations that shouldn't require recipes. You begin reading. To calm a panicked scribe. 2 sprigs. Rosemary. 1 cracked quill. A deep breath taken near an open window. Optional. Quiet humming from assistant. You blink. You smile. Other entries include to encourage bravery before opening the really bad drawer. To distract geese from paperwork. To impress a scroll that thinks it's better than you. Each one is charming nonsense and surprisingly useful. You copy every last one, then file it under Herbal Emotional Alchemy. The scroll after that appears to be a self-portrait of a scroll. Yes, a scroll wrote about itself. I contain knowledge, yes, but also crumbs and fear. My edges are frayed because someone whispered secrets into me. I am not the first copy, but I remember the original's size. You pause. This is either parody or genius. You transcribe the entire thing without changing a word. At the bottom it says, "You think you're copying me, but I am writing you." You glance nervously at your hands. You file it under anthropomorphic ambiguities. Then comes a scroll tied with a red string and a note. Only open if you're having a day. Well, you are. You untie it. It begins. Dear scribe, if your hands hurt, rest them. If your thoughts wander, follow them, briefly. If your candle flickers, relight it. Not just for the light, but for the act of trying. You are not failing. You are just tired. That's allowed. You stop there, hand over your chest. It feels like someone knew you'd need this today. You copy every line slowly, reverently, and add a footnote. This scroll is medicine. You place it gently in emergency use. Emotional. Next up is a puzzle. A scroll written entirely in metaphor. You read, "The river forgets nothing, but it does hum." Some scrolls are written in wind, others in weight. Ink is time you can touch if you dare. You try to copy it, but halfway through your quill breaks. Again, the assistant appears silently with another one. It's wrapped in twine. You frown. She says, "That's a metaphor too." You nod like you understand. You don't. Still, you write, because even nonsense has rhythm, and the rhythm carries you. Eventually, the metaphors resolve into something beautiful. You are not the candle. You are the flame. You stop copying. You sit back and let that one burn a little. The next scroll is strange. Not in content, but in size. It's small. Unreasonably so. Barely larger than a leaf. You unroll it and find one sentence. This is enough. That's it. You stare. You wait for more. Nothing comes. You copy the sentence with extreme care. Your handwriting becomes ceremonial. You file it under minimalism loud. The assistant walks by and nods once. The next scroll is blank. You wait. You hold it under candlelight. You breathe on it. You whisper to it. Then, in the tiniest letters, in the corner, a single word appears. Wait. You wait. After a full minute, a second word appears. Still, you grin. You add no ink. You file it under delayed gratification. Then comes a scroll you've seen before. Your own. The one you started. It's back. A note attached. Finish it. Your hands tremble. You unroll it. Your words look back at you. Halfway between then and now. You pick up your quill and write, and still I write. Not for perfection, but for memory. Not to be remembered, but to remember. And because the ink hasn't run out yet. You seal it, properly this time, and file it in a crate labeled Belonging. The assistant passes, no words, but she places a candle by your side. It's new, it's full, it's ready. So are you. You don't light the new candle just yet. You let it sit, tall and unused, a quiet promise beside your elbow. Instead, you work by the faint remainder of your old flame, half height, a little weepy, flickering, like it just heard a joke and isn't sure if it's allowed to laugh. The scroll on your desk now is curious, not in language but material. It's made of fabric, linen to be specific, soft, worn, frayed at the edges, like an old shirt you can't throw away because it knows too much. The ink has bled slightly. Whoever wrote this scroll did so with a heavy heart and a damp brush. The title reads, Instructions for Folding Time. You snort. You already know this one's going to be ridiculous. You copy anyway. To fold time, first find its edge. This is rarely visible, but sometimes felt behind the knees or between sides. Fold carefully. Do not crease. Time holds grudges. Store folded time under your pillow. Check weekly. Replace if it starts humming. You add a footnote of your own. In emergency, fold time into origami regret. You file it under temporal experiments, unverified. The next scroll is rolled impossibly tight. You almost need tweezers. It unrolls with a snap, like it's been holding its breath for centuries. Inside, a list of apologies. Just that. To the assistant for doubting her about the enchanted stapler. To the stars for looking away when they were trying to help. To the scroll I dropped in soup and called unimportant. To myself for thinking quiet meant failure. You add one of your own. To the reader who comes after me, I'm sorry for the smudges. I tried. You copy it all and file it under forgiveness, pending. The assistant doesn't speak, but when she passes by next, she gives your shoulder a tiny unspoken press. Affection, scribe style. Your next scroll is shaped strangely. Square. Folded inward like a letter. Sealed with black wax in the shape of an eye. You hesitate. You open. Inside, things I never told the library. You sit up. This is someone's secret confessional. I don't like the smell of vellum. I pretend I do. I once spilled tea on a genealogy and rewrote the entire thing from memory. That family tree now includes a ghost. I hid poems inside tax records. No one's noticed. I sometimes wish the candles would all go out, just so I could see what I really remember. You copy every line with quiet reverence. At the bottom, a scribbled addition. Please add your own. You think. You pause. And then write, I came here thinking I was just a pair of hands. Turns out, I'm also a voice. You file it under confessionals. Shh. Then comes a scroll that is humming, not loudly, just a faint thrum, like a heartbeat or distant wind, chimes arguing about philosophy. You unroll it and discover a list of definitions, but not normal ones. These are alternate meanings: ink, memory in liquid form, dust, time's handwriting, assistant, unofficial deity of continuity, error, the space where new thought happens. You add one, scroll, a vessel made of hope, mistakes, and threadbare patience. You file it under glossaries, rewritten, The candle beside you burns lower now. You don't mind. You're handed a scroll with a warning tag. Do not read aloud. Obviously, you want to read it aloud. You don't. Inside dreams. Recorded, cataloged, irrational. Dreamt I was a comma that someone kept skipping. Dreamt the assistant turned into a scroll and asked to be filed under mystery. Dreamt I woke up and kept copying a dream I hadn't had yet. You copy carefully. You file under dream archives. Noisy? You start to suspect some of these scrolls weren't meant to survive, but they did. And maybe that's what matters. Next comes a scroll that's blank except for a title at the top. The scroll I was too tired to write. You laugh. You copy the title and nothing else. Then add a tiny Me Too beneath it. You file it under incomplete. Perfect anyway. The assistant hands you another scroll. This one's a letter. To the next scribe, you will wonder if any of this matters. You will ask if the copying, the ink, the errors, the recopying is worth it. It is. Because someone has to remember. And someone, someday, will be grateful you did. You close your eyes. You take a breath. You copy the letter word for word. You add a single line at the bottom. I am that someone. Thank you. You file it under lineage. The final scroll of the day is unlabeled. Inside is one word. Listen. You look up. The assistant stands across the room. Still, silent, watching. She nods once. You nod back. Because you hear it now. The rhythm of scribes long gone. The scratching of quills like whispers in the dark. The steady breath of memory itself. And under it all, the soft hum of a candle saying, "You're not done yet." The next morning arrives not with sunrise, but with a subtle shift in candlelight. No bird song, no bells. Just the gentle knowledge that the night has exhaled and handed the pen to dawn. You stretch. Something in your back sounds like a scroll unrolling too quickly. The assistant walks by and deposits something on your desk with no explanation. It's not a scroll. It's a small box. Inside, snippets of parchment. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. You lift one. It reads, "When I ran out of space, I kept writing in my head." You smile. The box is labeled margins. You begin copying them, one by one. Each is only a few words, but every one feels like it was saved for this moment. The assistant once hummed, "I didn't recover." Filed a love poem under math just to see what would happen. I missed the scroll I burned. It knew me. Historians still argue whether these marginalia were ever meant to be read, or if they were simply memory leaks from exhausted minds. You believe they were both, accidents and offerings. You find one that reads, "I watched someone cry into a scroll once. It held the ink." You stop. You sit with it. Then you write your own. This box is where truth goes when there's no time to say it out loud. You file it under soft storage. The next scroll is badly damaged. The ink is smeared, the edges burned. You open it gingerly. A header remains, a list of all things I believed at age 12. You begin to read, that scrolls could whisper if I was quiet enough. That the assistant was 300 years old. That I would someday write something that mattered. You copy each one, some barely legible. You wonder how old the writer was when they added the final line. That I'd stop believing. I was wrong. You copy that too. File under growing pains. The next scroll is beautiful. Lavish calligraphy. Illuminated letters. Illustrations of scrolls smiling at each other like old friends. You expect it to be something grand. Philosophy. Myth. Theory. But it's a prank log. You read, year 215, swapped all scroll titles with soup recipes. Chaos ensued. Year 219, filed identical scrolls under good luck and absolutely not. Year 222, replaced assistant's quill with licorice root. She bit it. Silence has never been louder. You stifle a laugh. The assistant walks by, says nothing, but you swear her lips twitch. You add your own. Year 312. Wrote a bedtime scroll and snuck it into military strategy. Someone somewhere is now dreaming peacefully in chainmail. You file it under joyful crimes. Your next scroll is stained with what might be tea or regret or both. It's a list titled Things I Thought I'd Forget But Didn't. The smell of the first scroll I ever copied. The way the assistant said almost, and it felt like encouragement. The time someone called me a memory gardener. The way my fingers still ache in the shape of a quill. You add, that time the candle flickered at just the right moment, and I believed in magic again. You file it under persistence. Then comes a scroll entirely written in questions, not metaphysical ones this time, just odd, practical, sleepy questions. How many quills equal a sigh? Why is the ink always gone when I'm finally ready? Can a scroll be lonely? You copy them all, smiling. At the bottom, someone has scribbled an answer to the last one. Yes, but not if you're here. You file it under queries, answer gently. You're handed another scroll. The seal is broken. The top reads, A History of Accidents. You expect disasters. Instead, you find love. The scroll on time travel was copied backward. It worked anyway. Someone mistook a curse for a recipe. That's how we got time pie. An apprentice used lavender-scented wax. The entire room now smells like dreams. I spilled ink and made a map. Someone followed it. They returned happy. You laugh out loud. You add, a sleepy scribe filed their journal under important. It was. You file the scroll under fortunate errors. The next one is simple, a list of names, no context. Just names, one after another in various scripts, some faded, some bold, some barely more than a whisper. You recognize none of them, and yet, you know what this is. Scribes, the assistant says softly. Everyone who passed through, you hesitate. Then, with trembling fingers, you add your own. You file it under We Were Here. Later, a crate arrives. It's heavier than usual. You open it to find a scroll made of stitched pages. Cloth, bark, parchment, one piece of what might be wax leaves. It's a compilation. Hundreds of fragments. No single author. One line catches your eye. If the assistant ever says, well done, retire. That's the peak. You nod. At the end of the scroll, someone has written, there is no final scroll, only the one you choose to stop with. You file it under continuations. Finally, the assistant walks by. She places a single slip of paper on your desk. You unfold it. You've written more than you realize. You don't ask what she means. You just whisper, thank you. She nods once. The candle beside you flickers higher, and you write, still. The candle is a little shorter now. Your spine is a little older, and the soft scratch of your quill has become so constant, so deeply woven into the air, that silence now feels like something's missing. The scroll waiting on your desk is titled Things the Library Can't Hold. You pause, because it can hold a lot. Thousands of scrolls, millions of words, that weird drawer full of unclaimed socks. But then you read, the smell of your childhood home, the sound of a loved one laughing from another room, the moment you realized you were not alone in the world, the breath between tears and laughter, the decision to stay. You copy slowly, with reverence. You add your own, the look the assistant gave me once, like maybe I belonged here. You file it under intangibles, important. Then comes a scroll unlike any other. It's blank. Truly, no invisible ink, no hidden message, just pristine parchment. You glance at the assistant. She says, don't copy it. Just look. So you do. And in that silence, you realize This scroll is the pause, the breath, the space that makes everything else matter. The margin of the soul. You write nothing. You file it under the blank that holds it all. After that, the next scroll feels loud. It's labeled declarations. You brace yourself for shouting. Instead, it's gentle affirmations whispered across centuries. I am allowed to rest. I am still learning, and that is holy. My mistakes are evidence that I tried. I am not the worst thing I've ever written. You smile. You add, I am the page and the pen. You file it under courage, soft spoken. Then comes a scroll that is frayed, smudged, badly patched, with what appears to be chewing gum. Don't ask. The title reads, Things I meant to say but didn't. You take a deep breath. You begin. I admire the assistant, even when she pretends not to notice me. I miss someone I've never met. I think I'm getting better. I wish someone had told me this was allowed to feel good. You add, This scroll is heavier than it looks. You file it under unsent letters. The next scroll is titled Instructions for the Very End. You flinch, but curiosity wins. It begins. When the last scroll is copied, and your fingers are stained, and your heart full, light one last candle, not for the work, but for the warmth it gave you. Leave something behind, a line, a laugh, a thread, enough for the next scribe to follow. You swallow hard. At the bottom, and if you can, smile, not because it's over, but because you got to write at all. You copy every word. Then, unprompted, you whisper, Thank you. You file it under closure, optional. And now comes a scroll you didn't expect to see again. Your scroll. The one you started. The one you thought was finished. It's back. Again. But now something's changed. The handwriting at the end? Not yours. A new line. Reading this felt like hearing a friend. You blink. You reread it. You look up. The assistant isn't there. Not physically, but somehow her presence lingers. You copy that last line into your archive copy, and beneath it you write, I hope I've been that for someone too. You file it under companionship through ink. Now, for the first time, the room feels still in a new way, not paused, complete. The assistant finally returns, carrying a scroll so old it looks like breath might break it. She hands it to you without a word. The title reads, The First Scroll Ever Written Here. You tremble, not from fear, but from weight, from the strange holiness of touching a beginning. You unroll it, hand steady. It reads, We didn't know if it would last, but we wrote anyway. That's it. No name, no flourish, no proof. You copy the line with tears in your eyes. Then you file it under origin, believed. The assistant nods once, and for the first time, says your name, your real one, softly, like a benediction. You realize then that this place, this odd, dusty, sacred mess of memory and mistakes, has always had a place for you, and it always will. You return to your desk. You write one last line before the candle dies. We didn't know if it would matter, but we wrote anyway. The candle wavers now, flame curled like a comma at the end of an unfinished sentence. It's quieter than ever, like even the dust is holding its breath. The assistant stands by the door, not saying goodbye, just watching. The scroll before you is short, a final one, labeled only, for when you're ready. You are. You open it slowly, the parchment soft as old skin. Inside, you may not remember every word. That's okay. You may forget where you filed half of this. Also okay. You may wonder if anything you did made a difference. It did. You stayed. You cared. You made meaning in silence. That is more than most. You copy every line like it's the last thread of a tapestry. Then, on instinct, you flip the scroll over. There, In smaller writing, if you find yourself tired, rest in what you've built. If you find yourself lost, follow the ink trail back. And if you ever return, we'll keep a candle waiting. You don't cry, but something deep inside you bows. You add one final note, just beneath the last line. I'll find my way back. I always do. You file the scroll in the last empty space on the shelf. It fits perfectly. You stand. The assistant meets your eyes. No smile, just understanding. She hands you a small scrap of parchment, folded. You open it as the flame gutters down. It reads, "You've become part of the library now, not as a visitor, as a voice." You nod and walk out into the quiet. The door closes behind you with the gentlest click. Inside, the candle dies with dignity. Outside, the world feels a little bigger because you've carried something out with you. Soft, real, unspoken. Not just the memory of scrolls and ink, but the slow, stubborn courage of someone who stayed, who listened, who remembered. So now, as you lie there, still, quiet, wrapped in whatever soft blanket you call your own, maybe you feel it. That trace of parchment beneath your fingertips. Even if your hands are empty, that flicker of candlelight behind your eyelids, even if your room is dark. That hum of words written long ago, meant for someone just like you. You don't need to remember every scroll. You don't have to recall every line, because the important parts, they've already settled in you. The rhythm of careful hands, the hush of memory preserved, the warmth of knowing you were never really copying. They were always your stories too. Somewhere, in a room you might never visit again, your name is written on a shelf, not loudly, but with care, like a whisper that never needed to shout. The library is quiet now. It always is. But tonight, one more candle went out, and that was enough light to carry forward. So rest, dear scribe. You've written enough for now. And tomorrow, well, there might be another scroll, or maybe just the space to begin one. Either way, we'll keep a candle waiting. Good night.